Hi, good evening. You're watching The Right Stand. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. The US president looked rather weary. This as Donald Trump rambled on through a disjointed national TV address on Wednesday, a peculiarly brief address by Donald Trump, essentially a rehash of his previous Truth Social posts. Basically, he made 4 familiar points. The war is necessary, it has already been won, it must continue, and it will wrap up soon. All arguments he has been making daily, but no diplomatic breakthrough, no forthcoming deal or announcement of a military expansion. And that is why Trump's primetime national address will be remembered for everything that he did not say. No clarity on plans to send ground troops into Iran. More importantly, no plans to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or its devastating impact on the world economy. Simply put, this was his message to the world. The war is your problem, deal with it. He did declare that Iran will hit extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. What's the point given? He says the war objectives have already been met. Now, in fact, Trump did not even address Iran's uranium enrichment, just made a brief mention of the nuclear material still in Iran's possession. That too after bragging about American B-2 bombers obliterating Iranian nuclear sites last year. Clearly, none of that happened, which is why Iran's nuclear sites continue to survive. And yes, Trump also did not talk about dumping NATO. This despite his own public musings on a possible US exit out of the transatlantic military alliance. Unfortunately, his address was the biggest dampener for Americans because polling suggests many Americans were expecting a plan to deal with the rising cost of living in the US. All of that was missing from his speech. Ironically, it was this very US president who at the start of the year, in his own words, claimed to be locked and loaded to save Iran and its protesting civilians from the ruling regime. Has the deal maker failed to make a deal? We'll find out. First, listen in.
Producer of oil and gas on the planet without even discussing the millions of barrels that we're getting from Venezuela. Because of the Trump administration's policies, we produce more oil and gas than Saudi Arabia and Russia combined. As we asked, go to the strait and just take it, protect it, use it for yourselves. Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done, so it should be easy. And in any event, when this conflict is over, the strait will open up naturally. And we are going to finish the job, and we're going to finish it very fast. We're getting very close. I want to thank our allies in the Middle East, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain. They've been great, and we will not let them get hurt or fail in any way, shape, or form.
All right, so the US president may claim that the conflict is over or it's nearing its end, but is it really over? Because remember, war is always fought on 2 parallels. One is the military parallel and the other is, of course, the economy. Look at the way the global economy has been suffering. Let's try and get in perspective in terms of what the global impact is going to be, not just for the global economy, but also for India. And to do that, I'm joined in by Dr. John Sfakianakis, who's a chief economist and senior advisor at the Middle East and global markets. Many thanks to you, Dr. John, for joining in. To begin with, you warned the West Asia war could push the world into global recession and that it will be especially painful for developing economies like India. Why do you say so?
Well, first of all, it's thank you for the invitation. I believe this is the case because oil and the way Asia is purchasing oil from the Middle East today, but also other places, is beginning to look far more expensive than before. Even if we see a Middle East oil being shipped from Saudi Arabia and a little bit from Iran and also a little bit from the UAE, Asian prices for oil is at $150 to $160 a barrel. So even if Brent oil is today at 110, there is a premium that all Asian countries are paying, which is $40 to $60 above WTI or Brent. The second issue that I see the Asian economies facing is that there is demand destruction and also there is less oil available. And as it becomes more scarce, the Asian economies, and West Asia in particular, will be fighting over other developed economies for that oil if we don't get additional supply. So that will become more expensive for everybody. And there is a clear dependence in the case of India from natural petroleum gas for cooking. And a lot of it comes from the Gulf, a lot of it comes from Kuwait, from Iraq, from Iran, and there isn't enough available. Today, the world has the need of 10 additional million barrels of oil, and Asia cannot provide it, and nobody else can.
Okay. Dr. John, the Gulf's war is becoming Asia's crisis. Global oil and gas prices, you've mentioned, are rising, adding to the overall scarcity for countries not just like India, China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Cambodia, even the Philippines. What's your assessment of the impact to the world's workshop that Asia is, given we are the manufacturing hub now?
Well, the impact will be grave because, as you mentioned, all these countries are facing a challenge today. It's because of the cost push inflation, but also the scarcity of oil. And if you have scarce oil, what happens to prices? It goes up. But as this crisis becomes more globalized, and we do have global inflation, the Asian economies will face difficulties, but also even China. China has reserves worth around 3 months of oil. If they run out of oil, they will be facing the difficulties of additional supply, and somebody needs to get oil into the Chinese economy. That becomes an issue over time. Hence, if we go into a global recession, China and Asia, and West Asia in particular, will be facing that, which means less manufactured goods going into Europe because there is falling demand, less manufactured goods into the US because there is less demand. We're talking about a global recession, which means that the world of manufacturing in Asia is going to decline.
Dr. John, the US president has also indicated that he's looking towards another 2 to 3 weeks in terms of a timeline. With energy supply chains under disruption, what could this mean for financial markets and the volatility that we're already witnessing?
Well, for financial markets, this is not good news. Financial markets were not expecting this. So today, tomorrow, they're going to be shut. Next week, they will take their cues from whatever happens over the weekend. Something could happen over this weekend or not. We're still waiting and surprised with every move President Trump makes. Okay. Also, the president keeps on using the 2 to 3 weeks window, and that is not a good market confidence creator. It creates a lot of angst. We were told a month ago that we're nearly done with the war. 2 weeks into the war, we were told that the war is nearly finished, and now we were told 2-3 weeks. And in addition to that, there is a third aircraft carrier arriving by the end of April. More troops are arriving end of April, and it seems this is not going to end anytime soon. And that is a challenge. So I think for everybody, this is unforeseen circumstances, and still the market is expecting more negative news to come out of Washington and the president if we continue like this.
So the supply chain disruptions are already being felt across sectors ranging from aviation to food supply chains. How do you foresee the impact on global trade, even on daily life?
Well, this crisis has been having 3 stages. The first stage was when we looked at the war and there was closure at the Strait of Hormuz. The second stage was for governments around the world to announce strategic reserves being released. And then the third kind of stage, which we're in, is this anticipation that this is a quick war and it will end soon. The fact of the matter is that supply chains have been hugely disturbed. Today, the 10 million barrels of oil that are out of the market, if you extend this over 3 months, it will require many, many millions of barrels that somebody has to provide. And what will happen is, in the case of no provisioning, because the US cannot provide additional oil, there are certain limits to the oil that the US can provide for the export market, we will have demand destruction, which means that we will have, as Pakistan is doing, a shorter weekday, working from home, India
Right.
having queues for
Right.
cooking oil, Indonesia is facing problems. You referenced the Philippines is going to have serious negative effects. And we haven't yet dealt with the developed world. When the developed world goes into the summer and they begin to buy natural gas for the winter, and
Okay.
when they begin to replenish the little crude oil they have on reserves, and when China in 3 months is without any crude oil, then the difficult news is higher prices and difficult economic recession that will be similar to other recessions we have faced, if not greater, due to the oil embargo of 1973. So we are in a supply crunch situation. Farmers are going to be up in arms because they will have no fertilizer. And
Okay.
the end consumer will face it immediately at the food table. And then we're talking about a very globalized food and energy crisis on top of everything else, which is the uncertainty. We don't have the opening of the strait. We have a war going on, plus the concern that regional countries could get involved in this war, and it becomes something far greater and uncontrollable than what we thought initially.
Sure. Dr. John, my last question. The US president has defended the American involvement in this war by comparing American involvement in previous wars, quoted the duration of World War I and II, even Vietnam, Iraq. But the economists say the global shock that this war has caused to the entire world, especially with the kind of disruptions we've seen in oil, energy, and the shipping industry, which is, of course, come to a screeching halt now. What are the options for the world at the moment?
Well, the options today is the critical part is the Strait. The Strait of Hormuz needs to open. If this continues and we don't have any supply of oil, we finally realized how important Gulf oil is to the world and how important is the Strait of Hormuz. If, for instance, the Houthis get involved and they start attacking Saudi pipelines, offloading and unloading pipelines, that becomes a huge concern, because then an additional 5 million barrels is taken away. If Fujairah is hit once again by Iran, then we take another 1.7 million barrels. So that adds up very quickly to 16 million barrels. And there is no strategic reserve, nor the United States, neither the United States nor the IEA can supply and support with strategic reserves. We will all run out of oil very quickly.
Okay.
The end is a quick resolution. All wars, let me remind everybody, begin very quickly. And all presidents and prime ministers believe in short wars. This was going to be a quick war. And the Vietnam War was going to be a quick war. And it didn't end up being a quick war. Let me remind everybody again, in 2003, the Iraq invasion took a very long time to complete. It was a quick invasion in terms of successfully militarily handling the Iraqi forces, but then it took the US up until 2011 to exit and disengage. So I don't think this is going to be a quick war until we realize the consequences, the greater consequences that exist for the global economy. We are being hijacked globally by a much bigger beast that is being unleashed in front of us. And that's the end of growth and success and the beginning of misery and recession for all of us.
Thank you so much for joining in with those very precious insights. Dr. John, it was a pleasure speaking to you over here at the Right Stand. So we heard what Dr. John had to say. Let's quickly take that conversation forward. And of course, the US President's national address. What implications is this war going to have globally as well? Let's bring in our esteemed guests. I'm joined in by Zohreh Kharazmi, who's an associate professor at the University of Tehran, Ambassador Navdeep Suri, who is the former Indian High Commissioner to Egypt and UAE, David Wurmser, who is a former official at the US State Department and also a Middle East expert. Let me quickly bring in Ambassador Suri right now. Ambassador, you heard what Dr. John had to say. He's saying that the global economy has been hijacked by this war. The US president has also defended this war by comparing the duration of other wars and the American involvement given World War I, World War II, even Vietnam and Iraq. But do you think that the shock that the global economy has received through this war, which has just lasted a month so far, is going to have far-reaching effects?
Yes, I do. I think it's a tragedy that we were all subjected, and particularly the audiences in the US were subjected by President Trump to 20 minutes of primetime fluff last night without any single substantive element coming out of his speech. He's saying the war can continue for 2 or 3 weeks. I think he's at a point where he doesn't decide when it ends. He can decide when US stops bombing, but the closure of the Strait of Hormuz could still continue. The impact on the global economy will still continue. We don't know, are there negotiations taking place? He seems very elliptical about it, and the Iranians certainly don't seem to be in any mood to negotiate after having been bombed twice in the middle of negotiations. So I think the global economy and the Indian economy, by implication, is at a very grim place right now. And history is going to judge this past month very, very darkly. I think this war will be remembered as Israel's war and America's folly, and the damage that it has wrought on the global economy.
Zohreh Kharazmi, if I could quickly bring you in on the claim that the US president has made today that he's looking towards a 2 to 3 week timeline. And even if the US does intend to make an exit out of this war, then do you think the war is coming to an end? Is Iran going to pull the pause button?
Actually, the United States is in a very delicate situation, and Trump is very much devastated and desperate in finding a way to, as the end game of this war. But giving 10 days, I think, was a very good opportunity for Israel and the Arab proxies in the region, U.S. Arab proxies in the region, to bring a lot of destruction in Iranian civilian side and also the vital civil infrastructure. It was minutes ago that for 2-3 times, the B1 bridge in Karaj, that is the highest bridge in the Southwest Asia, was bombarded. And you can imagine that when there is a bridge that the cars are actually passing, people are passing, how does it mean from the war crime point of view? And also finishing the war, if needs any negotiations, you see Dr. Kamal Kharrazi, that was actually is the former foreign minister, that was the foreign affairs advisor to the supreme leader, and recently was missioned to take part in any probable negotiations for ceasefire, was assassinated by Israelis and Americans 1 day ago, actually yesterday. So you see there is no real evidence on the ground that the United States and Israel like to find a real diplomatic solution. Particularly Israelis, I think, have took these markets as their hostage, and they are indicating Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, a lot of intentions, even assertive motivations asserted by them that they like to keep on this war,
Sure.
and Iran has no way to except to retaliate.
Yes, so there are attempts being made to usher in diplomacy, and by the entire global community, not just by, say, Persian Gulf or the GCC nations engaging, say, with countries like France or even China and Pakistan trying to step in as possible negotiators. But I want to quickly bring in David Wamso on that note. David, you heard Zohre also highlight the kind of war crimes that are taking place in Iran. There are civilian casualties and mounting civilian deaths even in Israel. US troops have been lost across the Persian Gulf. More importantly, also equally importantly, look at the kind of damage we are seeing to the oil refineries, to the energy infrastructure. I wonder, why would the US president want to continue in this war if he claims that the US objectives have been met?
Well, they haven't all been met. First of all, let me correct the propaganda that the colleague from Tehran said. These are not war crimes. These are military targets. Even bridges are military targets. You can't just throw out these terms. These are terms of art.
But the school in Minab, was that a military target? The hospitals,
and water desalinations
are they military targets?
Electricity plants.
Tell me, the school in Minab, which was targeted, was that a military target? Are hospitals military targets? Are aid facilities? There was a civilian aircraft which was meant to bring humanitarian aid to Delhi to ferry back the aid that's being sent from India by Indians. That was attacked and destroyed. Do you think that's a military target?
Well, not all military targets are. First of all, hospitals, schools are targets if we have informed them that they are being used for military purposes. The moment the IRGC uses these institutions, and we have plenty of evidence that they're using these institutions from hospitals to schools and basing their the repressive apparatus of the state in some of these places, that automatically converts them to military targets, whether they were a school or not. That's number one. Number two, bridges are critical logistical structures that allow movement of forces, and in this case, repressive forces. So these are military targets. Now, the school was apparently a mistake, and that happens in war. It's something that Iran in 1979, when it essentially declared war on the United States, should have thought about, that if it wants to spend 50 years attacking the United States, sooner or later the United States is going to respond to that after a few thousand Americans are dead at their hands. So this is a war that Iran wanted, and it's wanted for 50 years and thought it could win. So as far as the United States being in despair, I can tell you the administration is quite confident. All the measures are pretty good, that the Iranian regime is beginning to lose control. Its military structures are being devastated and destroyed. Civilian infrastructure is a target in war too. Every war has that. Again, intentional attack on civilians is a war crime. And that is what Iran is doing by sending missiles into Israeli cities. That is what Iran is doing by massacring 30 to 50,000 of its own people in January. So when you take an embassy hostage, that is a war crime. The Iranian government has specialized for 50 years in war crimes and terrorism around the world and so forth.
I want to bring in Ambassador
Suri. The United States is following the rules of war.
Zohre,
the Iranian regime is not.
Zohre,
yes.
The other big question that arises is that if Iran has already declared that the Strait of Hormuz is not blockaded for its allies and friendly nations, that includes Pakistan, China, Turkey, India, then why not just reopen the Strait of Hormuz for allied nations to Iran and have a blanket safe passage for all of them? Because Iran is technically holding the global economy to a hostage.
You see, what's running in Hormuz, and I think that with Houthis also from Yemen joining this war, maybe Bab al-Mandab have the same, actually, new regime, is appearance of a new security paradigm that is very fair, because Iranians have been under the attacks of the United States through the economic terrorism for years. United States has tried to besiege Iran, to isolate Iran for years. And now that they
But
started
Zohre,
and
the
began this...
sentiment, no, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. The sentiment here in India is, as an ally to Iran, we have old civilizational ties, we have a sizable Shia population, we are also Indian Shias, actually, Indian Muslims are sending a lot of aid to Iran. Why should we bear the brunt of this war?
Actually, when you are talking about a civilizational background, yes, there's a strong tie between Indians and Iranians, and Iran has many times expressed a peaceful coexistence with the Indian government. However, Mr. Moody's very great ties with Israel and the United States is evident, but I think if India likes to...
So if we have great ties with Israel and the United States.
Okay, the India is very easily, actually, because they are also the ally of the United States. So I think that they can convince Americans and Israelis that this unprovoked war, as Joe Kent also indicated as a Trump appointee, should be stopped. And Iran is in the position of a very legitimate position of self-defense. So expecting someone that is the target and the victim of the war to stop is not fair. So India can do all its diplomatic efforts or, to convince the United States and Israel to stop the act of aggression first.
Ambassador Suri, is this a war that we should be negotiating? Brings us back to square one, to that question where everybody is talking about how India can also play negotiator over here. But is this really our war to mediate?
Well, because we are getting hurt by the war, we have a stake in bringing an early conclusion to it. I don't know how effective we will be because, we do have very good relations with Israel, and we should be using our good offices with Israel. That, you started this war without paying heed to the damage that you're going to be doing to us. I think the UK initiative, that is a virtual meeting taking place in the next couple of days to build a coalition, might, and India is participating in that, and the United States is not, which I think is a really good thing because it's part of the problem. Hopefully some good will come out of a meeting, which is a new grouping minus the US, to leave it out. I do want to come to one point that David made, and it is sort of unfortunate to see him use language that is so akin to what the Israelis were using in Gaza to flatten their hospitals and schools and universities. And it's exactly what they're doing in Lebanon right now. This whole conflation that every hospital, every school, every university is a Hamas base or a Hezbollah base, and every ambulance and every journalist, it doesn't work. And I think people have seen through it. Let's be more sensitive. Let's be humane. Let's spare the children. Let's spare the hospitals. You can't keep going about it, and please don't defend it. It's indefensible.
David, would you like to come in on that? Because even as an American, I must tell you that the pollings are indicating that, the US president is staring at the lowest approval ratings ever. And most importantly, today's address had nothing to do with the cost of living crisis in the US and how Americans ought to deal with it. Speak to me as an American as well.
Well, yeah, I do. But first of all, about his polling, he was actually lower in the polls before the war began. His approval rating was lower. So the war hasn't really dented that all that much.
Well, it's hit a record low as far as the CNN ratings that we've been sharing.
CNN was, but there are other polls that put him up about 2-3 points from where he was at the low point before the war and so forth.
Okay, but I'm sure you'll agree they are really low and dismal.
They are, but there's larger issues involved here with the American people and President Trump, and I think that the war is not right now going to be the determinant factor either in November, or certainly in 2028. What you were saying, though, about the economics, and I think this one really has to understand President Trump. He's a businessman. He does follow all this stuff, but he's also a businessman who understands paradigm shifts. And what you're seeing here is a paradigm shift. So one cannot look at it and say, this is the way the world operated on a month ago,
Okay.
or before a month ago, we will go back to the way the world operated in a month.
I
And
need
this
to wrap up
disruption
the
is
debate,
something.
but David, you said that he's a businessman. He understands ground reality as far as the mathematics of all of it is concerned. But this is a businessman who's really miscalculated this war. First of
I
all,
don't
he
believe he
arrived.
has.
No, but David, you presented your point of view. Now, here's what I have to ask you. Here's a US president, in terms of why his approval ratings have reached a -18. I'll tell you why. This is a US president who arrived on the promise that he will not be embarking on wars. He's in fact condemned previous US presidents, including Republicans like Mr. Bush and even the Democrat presidents, for embarking on other wars. Moreover, he had promised that he will not be sending boots on the ground, and today he's exactly doing that very thing that he promised not to do. What happens to his promise and that stance of steering clear of any form of US interventionism, especially in the Middle East? This is a man who arrived on the promise and in fact was tom-tomming about he was responsible for bringing in the Abraham Accords.
Well, he thinks that the Abraham Accords will expand. I mean, I didn't get to finish my point. My point is, look, first of all, he didn't promise that he would not go to war with Iran. He promised no endless wars. He does not intend to have an endless war here. He promised over the last 40 years, many times, if you go back to see what he said in various programs, shows, and so forth, he's made it very clear that he has a very hardline view of Iran, and that he feels that the Iranian regime itself is the problem. And you can go back 40 years and see that. You can see it 20 years ago. You can see it 5 years ago. So he's actually very consistent in his views. He's even called for example, several years ago, before he was president, for the seizure of Karg Island. So one has to be very careful on what he promised, didn't promise.
It's
The
not
second
about
thing
promises, it's about self-contradictions. Every day he's contradicting himself. There was no announcement of a military expansion. There were indications coming in that he wants to send ground troops to Karg Island. Well, none of that was done. There was no diplomatic breakthrough that was announced today in his national address. Moreover, there was no announcement of a forthcoming deal with Iran or with any of the Persian Gulf allies. What happens to the Persian Gulf allies now? Are they being left in a lurch to fend for themselves?
Let me, these are good questions. Let me address this. Look, we're looking at it from the immediacy of the situation, and what your previous guest John said, and so forth, is this is all true. I think Trump is looking months ahead. That he knows this regime is not capable of being dealt with. He has indicated that. He sent a 15-point plan. The regime didn't even deal with it seriously. It was really their last chance. So there, in his mind, there's no real diplomatic solution here that the Iranian regime can accept because they're simply that extreme.
All right.
Now, wait, let me finish here. He's looking months ahead. He knows that the only way to get the economy completely changed and back on track, and in fact in a better position than it was before the war, is to open up Iran to international development. And that can only happen when this regime is fundamentally changed. And so he's looking at a future where Iranian gas finally is exploited heavily and brought onto market, that Iranian oil is going without restrictions, and so forth. But he does not
You've made
see
your
that
point.
as a
You've made your
possibility.
point. I want to give quick closing thoughts to Ambassador Suri. Ambassador Suri, the word coming in from Iran is that they have a civilization which goes back to 6,000 years. And a country which is barely 250 years old cannot be dictating terms in terms of how a country should be ruled.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm no great fan of this particular government in Iran.
Neither am I. Neither am I.
Yeah, but we must stick to the facts. The Strait of Hormuz was open until the 28th of February. It isn't now, and the US wants to walk away from it. I believe you have the principle, if you broke it, you own it. Here you're saying, I broke it, you fix it. That's what President Trump is telling the Europeans. And that's unacceptable because we are left holding the baby for actions that the US engaged in unilaterally without any consultation with anyone. So, how do you defend that?
Zore, your quick closing thoughts. Do you not think that these are desperate times where Iran needs to value its allies and perhaps also ensure that the Strait of Hormuz is at least usable for countries that are not involved, particularly the ones from the Asian subcontinent?
Okay, sure. You see, David is right. We may all look at the months coming. I think that the new security regime is established in the West Asia, and what the United States is doing is bringing the whole economy, global economy, bring down, and actually a very bad recession is something that the world is expecting. Even only for fertilizers that are not passing through and transiting from the very venues that for years Iran was just letting it to be open. 315 million people may come to hunger. So I think that this is something that the Trump is making with actually his Netanyahu's genocidal complicit and the GCC complicits. So this is the months that are coming.
Sure. So I just want to end with quick closing thoughts of John. John said that the war may be short term, according to the US president, but the effects are going to be extremely long term, and perhaps the entire global economy will be reeling under those effects. Many thanks to you all for joining in on this discussion here on